I'm Michael Frodenberg, this is Filmmasters. We are building part 6 of building the Apprehension engine. What we are creating is the Hurdy Gurdy Wheel. I'll be using a drill press to make sure that the part is nice and round and doesn't have a wobble to it. When I created the very first Apprehension engine, I created it with a pine wheel. I had to sand it and make sure that the actual wheel was smooth, and because of that it gave it a slight wobble. And what that did is when the strings were vibrating, they would go up and down, which would cause a drone that had that sort of up and down sound in the actual drone itself. What we want to do is make sure that the Apprehension engine's hurdy-gurdy wheel is perfectly round and doesn't have a wobble. If we do that, what will happen is it means that your strings will continuously drone forever, infinite. As long as you'll keep on cranking that crank, it will continuously drone at the same harmonics, which is what we're going to try and do today. We're going to be using MDF board. I'm going to use a drill press. If you don't have a drill press, that's fine. Find somebody who has one. You can use a drill and the circular cutting saw tool that goes into that. Just make sure that you keep it nice and straight when you're doing it. So that is an option for you. If not, I'm going to show you how to make the perfect hurdy-gurdy wheel with MDF. So let's get straight into the tutorial. For the hurdy-gurdy wheel, I'm going to be using 16 millimeters of MDF wood. Now, it doesn't matter the size of it, as long as it's around 16 millimeters thick. So I'm just putting a rule next to the thickness so you can see it. Now I'm going to show you what tools that you can use to make the hurdy-gurdy wheel. Now I've got two options here. Now the one on the right is a wood hole cutter. It is something that you can put onto a drill, and you've got different sizes. I would have used the larger one. I have tested it out. However, I got better results from the one I'm going to show you on the left-hand side, and that's the one I'm going to be using. Now, it's adjustable. It is called an adjustable wood hole cutter. Now, it's got two blades and a drill in the center of it. So what it does is it obviously starts to drill a hole down to center it, and then it starts to scrape the sides to cut it. Now, the thickness of the hurdy-gurdy wheel is 6 inches, so I'm going to be making the tool, or using the tool, to cut a circle at 6 inches. Now, just a warning, if you are using this tool, make sure that you are over the age of 18 and have supervision from an adult. If you're not, it's also a good idea to keep your hand away from it when it's spinning, and also do not wear any loose clothing. So it's 6 inches, which is 15 centimeters from one cutting edge to the other. So that is the circle. Now, if you don't have that tool and you're going to use the circular cutting saw, the one that I showed you on the right hand side, that's okay. You can do that. It doesn't matter the diameter, as long as it's around 6 inches and no bigger. So when I'm inserting it, the first thing I'm going to do obviously is make sure that it sits in there, and then I'm going to use the chuck and tighten it, and also make sure that it doesn't hit the side. Now I'm using a drill press. You can use a hand drill. However, if you want to get it nice and square, which is what you would want to do when you're building this, it is ideal to use a drill press. If you don't have one, ask someone who has one, if you can borrow it, or better still, if you know somebody who does woodcrafts and has one, they can use or create one for you. So I've put the tool in there. I'm making sure it's clear and it's the clearance and it's not touching anything. Now with the drill press, there is a metal plate that is adjustable underneath it, and I've moved that to the far left hand side, and I've just lowered it down to make sure it doesn't touch that. And I'm going to actually use that with a G clamp or a C clamp or a D clamp, depending on what part of the world you're in, to tighten it down and hold that MDF down before we start drilling. So when you first start to drill down, just slowly ease the tool in. What you want to do is slowly drill in until it starts to scrape the very top with the two cutting blades. And you'll see it will start to happen. There we go. And so it's a matter of making sure that you're not putting too much pressure on, as you can see, because if you do that, it will catch onto the material. Now, if you're using this tool like I am, Make sure you do not put it into a hand drill unless you can get a bracket that goes onto a standard drill, which allows you to sort of mimic a press. And if you do it that way, that should be fine. However, it's not a good idea because you want to try and get it as square as possible. Obviously, you can use one of those hole cutting saws, which I showed you before, which we're not using in this one, with a hand drill. And again, it's just about trying to make sure that you are applying an equal amount of speed, putting a bit of pressure on it so it doesn't get stuck. The only thing is, I found that this one leaves a better edge, whereas the hole cutter, it was a little bit rougher. So because of that reason, you would have to obviously do a bit of sanding, which is another reason why I'm using the MDF. MDF shows a really nice edge, whereas if you're using pine, for example, it does seem to tear the timber a little bit. My very first Apprehension engine did use a pine wheel, and I was still able to get good results by using that pine wheel, so you can still make it out of pine. It's just MDF is a better material for this. One thing when you're using this, obviously, is be patient. It does take a little bit to scrape, obviously, and get that nice edge. And now I'm just finishing off the actual cut itself. So slowly moving it up and down as you're drilling will allow that wheel to come away from the rest of the material, as you can see there. So I'm just going to lift it out a little bit. Looks like it's actually got caught. And obviously you make sure you turn the drill off before you do that. And as you can see, it's just come out from the bottom. Sometimes you do have a lip, as you can see here, when you're using this tool. It has different variations. It could be because one of the side of the cutting tool is a little bit off center. I'll show you how I remove it. So what I did is I just put a piece of pine in there and used the G clamp in order to hold it down. And I'm going to drill all the way down until the drill goes to the other end. It's going to start making a cut, obviously, but we're not going to cut all the way through with this tool. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to actually put the wheel in there and flip it over so that that seam is facing the top of the actual wheel, and then I'll bolt it down to the timber, and then I'll remove the drill bit, which you'll see shortly, and that will allow us to take away that edge off the wheel. So what I'm going to do now is obviously the wheel is going to go where the drill bit is. So I'm going to use an Allen key. So this tool allows me to remove the drill center or the drill bit from the center of it. So I'll use that Allen key just to drop that down while it's in the actual drill itself. And what this will do, it just allows me to put a bolt then through the wheel so we don't have to drill through the bolt, which obviously is something we don't want to do. So I'm using a bolt to hold it down. So obviously it's a good idea to get a bolt that is the right thickness as the hole in order to center it perfectly with the board below it. I'm just using a nut on the other end of that bolt in order to tighten it underneath, because we want to secure it so it doesn't move around. So I'm just using a wrench, I guess you could say, in order to bolt that to the actual board itself. Now all I need to do is slowly move the drill press down while it's spinning, and you'll see that that edge is starting to come off nicely. It's nicely centered, so we're going to get a nice clean cut. Now another option you could do is obviously remove the board and flip it over when you're cutting the MDF if you don't want to do this step. If you're using a hole cutting saw, then you probably won't need to do this step at all. You just go all the way straight through the material. And then all I need to do is unbolt it, and there we have our wheel with a nice clean edge to it, as you can see. And there's no sanding done to this. Now you can put some very fine sandpaper over it and just roughen it up or smooth it. And I've actually made two wheels because we're going to be doing two different types of crank mechanism, I guess you can say. Now here's my very first attempt of creating a pine wheel. As you can see, it's got a curvature to it. So I wasn't exactly happy with that. It did work, obviously, but this is going to have a better result.
So there's a bit of a burn on there, and that's obviously because I put too much pressure on as I was starting to drill. And as you can see, the second one is a lot cleaner. But what I'll do is I'm going to be, in the next tutorial, showing you how to use a wooden dowel for a shaft, or if you want to use a metal one with a thread on it, which will allow us to adjust the wheel. So one will be glued in, whereas the other one will be bolted in using nuts and bolts, which is a lot better if you're wanting to make adjustments.
And that is how I created the perfectly round in MDF using a drill press hurdy-gurdy wheel. So in the next part of the video, I'm going to show you how we're going to set it up. And I'm going to give you two options. You can create it with a wooden dowel, and you can glue the actual hurdy-gurdy wheel into the Apprehension engine. Or the other option, which I prefer, is I'll be using a threaded bolt, using nuts so we can adjust the wheel, and we'll be making the handle and crank with that. So we're going to get straight into that in the next tutorial. If you want to become a Fieldmaster sub, it is pretty simple. Subscribe to the channel. You can like me on Facebook and or on Twitter. And until next time, don't just film it, master it.